It was supposed to be a coronation. The main event of Monday Night Raw, the culmination of a year-long story where the brash, unstoppable champion, Damian Vanguard Cross, was set to solidify his reign against a veteran challenger. The lights were down, his epic theme music rattled the arena's rafters, and 20,000 people were on their feet, a sea of cell phone lights capturing what they believed would be a historic moment. Vanguard stood center ring, the gold gleaming on his shoulder, a smirk etched across his face. He soaked in the adulation, the perfect picture of a modern-day titan. The referee was giving his final instructions. Everything was exactly as it should be, every beat meticulously planned, every moment produced for maximum effect. And then, it wasn't. From the top of the entrance ramp, a figure emerged from the shadows. There was no music, no pyrotechnics, no grand announcement from the commentary team, just a woman, walking. She wore simple jeans, a plain gray coat, and her expression was unnervingly calm. The crowd's roar faltered, dipping into a murmur of collective confusion. Security guards standing by the barricade looked at each other, their training offering no protocol for this. She wasn't rushing the ring like a crazed fan. She was walking with a quiet, unshakable purpose, as if she belonged there more than anyone. The cameras, programmed to follow the action, hesitantly zoomed in on her, and for a few seconds, the entire global broadcast was just the soft sound of her footsteps on the steel ramp. No script, no announcement. Out of nowhere, she walked straight into the ring, live on air. The crowd couldn't believe it, and the WWE locker room was absolutely shocked. This was the moment that changed everything. She stepped through the ropes, never breaking her stride, and came to a stop just a few feet from the champion. Vanguard's smirk had vanished, replaced by a mask of pure disbelief. He looked from her to the referee, to the entrance ramp, searching for an answer that wasn't there. The air in the arena grew thick, heavy with 1,000 unspoken questions. The crowd fell into a complete, deafening silence. The woman didn't speak. She didn't hold a sign. She simply stood there, her gaze fixed on the championship belt resting on Vanguard's shoulder. Her eyes, magnified on the Titantron for the world to see, held a universe of emotion that was impossible to decipher. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was something deeper, something ancient. A profound sorrow mixed with an unbreakable resolve. She held his gaze for what felt like an eternity, a silent conversation passing between two strangers in the heart of a spectacle built on noise. Then, she slowly looked away from him, panning her eyes across the faces in the front row, then up to the rafters, as if she was trying to absorb the very soul of the building. The director in the production truck, in a state of panic, screamed into the commentators' headsets. The screen abruptly cut to black. An emergency commercial break began, leaving millions of viewers staring at an ad for car insurance, their minds still trapped in that silent, impossibly tense ring. The moment the broadcast cut, the fragile order of the backstage area shattered into a million pieces. It was pure pandemonium. Producers, their faces pale, were yelling into multiple headsets at once, trying to get answers from a security team that had none. Vince McMahon, or the figurehead embodying that ultimate authority, was reportedly in a state of controlled fury, his office door shut, the muffled sounds of his anger echoing down the hall. Wrestlers who moments before had been icing their knees or preparing for their own segments were now crowded around the small monitors in the gorilla position, the space just behind the curtain. Their own meticulously crafted characters and storylines evaporated, replaced by the raw, human curiosity of spectators. They were all asking the same questions. Was this a work? An angle so secret that no one was clued in? It had to be a work, some whispered. This was the business of manufactured drama, after all. But the longer they watched the internal feeds, the more that theory crumbled. The sheer panic on the faces of the production crew was too real. The genuine confusion radiating from the champion, Damian Vanguard, couldn't be faked. He had been rushed out of the ring by a swarm of officials, his face a thunderous mix of rage and bewilderment. His moment, the peak of his career, had been hijacked. Not by a rival, not by a returning legend, but by a ghost. A silent woman in a grey coat who had managed to do what no opponent could. She had made him completely irrelevant in his own spotlight. Surrounded by a circle of tense security guards backstage, the woman remained an island of calm in a sea of chaos. Her name, they would soon learn, was Ilara. She offered no resistance, showed no sign of distress. She simply stood with her hands loosely clasped behind her back, her breathing even, her gaze distant. They tried to question her, their voices a mixture of authority and pleading, but she refused to speak. She shook her head gently, her expression conveying not defiance, but a simple, unchangeable fact. Her words were not for them. She would only speak to the man in charge. The entire corporate machine of the WWE was grinding to a halt, paralyzed by the silence of one person. An old road agent, a man named Mike, who had been with the company since the smoky bingo hall days, watched the scene from a distance. He'd seen it all. Riots in the 70s, backstage brawls that were terrifyingly real, the biggest stars at their best and their worst. But this was different. He'd dealt with countless fans who had jumped the barricade, their eyes wide with a frantic desire for 15 seconds of fame. They were always easy to read, a mix of adrenaline and delusion, but Ilara was nothing like them. Mike looked past the guards, past the producers and into her eyes. He didn't see a fanatic. He saw a purpose, a deep, settled conviction that was far more unnerving than any wild-eyed outburst. It was the look of someone who had come to deliver a message, who had accepted any and all consequences, because the mission was more important than the outcome. By sunrise the next morning, the footage was inescapable. It wasn't just on wrestling blogs and fan forums, it was the lead story on major news networks, a trending topic that dwarfed global politics and celebrity gossip. They called it the silent interruption. News anchors who wouldn't know a headlock from a headline dissected the clip with forensic intensity. The woman's calm, determined walk. The champion's bewildered expression. The crowd's descent from a roar into a stunned hush. It was a perfect, self-contained mystery, a piece of human drama that had accidentally unfolded on one of the world's biggest stages. Her anonymity was her power. With no name and no context, she became a blank canvas onto which millions of people projected their own stories of quiet defiance and unspoken truths. The WWE's formidable public relations department was in an impossible position. They were masters of spinning narratives, of turning fiction into fact and back again. But how could they spin a story they didn't understand themselves? They released a terse corporate statement about breached security protocols and ensuring performer safety. But the words were hollow. They sounded like a government agency trying to explain a UFO sighting. The public didn't care about security protocols. They cared about the woman. They wanted to know who she was and what she wanted. Her silence had created a vacuum, and the entire world was rushing to fill it with speculation. Every hour that passed without an answer, her legend grew. She was no longer just a trespasser, she was a symbol. The first crack in the mystery came not from a press release, but from the dusty archives of a retired wrestling photographer. Late that afternoon, he posted an old, grainy photograph on his social media page. The caption was simple: "I remember this day." The photo showed a beloved, long-deceased wrestler, a legend known to the world as the Titan, standing backstage. He was still in his ring gear, sweat glistening on his brow, but the fearsome warrior persona was gone. In its place was a look of pure, gentle love. He was holding the hand of a small girl, no older than 6 or 7, who was looking up at him with absolute adoration. The photographer confirmed what the internet's amateur detectives were already piecing together. The little girl in the photo, the one with the same unmistakable, piercing eyes as the woman in the ring, was his daughter. Her name was Ilara, and she had never, ever been involved in the wrestling business. The story shifted on its axis. The question was no longer, who is she? It was, why now? The Titan was a figure of reverence, a man who had died tragically at the peak of his career 2 decades earlier, leaving behind a legacy of integrity and raw, unshakable strength. His name was spoken in hushed, respectful tones. He was from an era before corporate branding and catchphrases. For his daughter, who had so carefully avoided the spotlight her entire life, to suddenly appear in this way, something had to have gone terribly wrong. The mystery deepened, but now it had a heart. It had a history. To understand Ilara's walk, you have to understand the man her father was. The Titan wasn't just a character. He was a creed. He represented an older, grittier era of professional wrestling, a time when authenticity was the currency of the realm. Fans loved him, not for his flashy promos or merchandise, but for the silent, unwavering dignity he carried. He was a champion of the people because he felt like one of them, a man who worked hard, kept his word, and respected the canvas he wrestled on. He gave every ounce of his being to the business, and his sudden death in a car accident left a void that was never truly filled. He was a hero, enshrined in the Hall of Fame, his memory seemingly protected forever. But time and commerce have a way of eroding even the most sacred things. In recent years, the company had begun to merchandise his memory. His face was plastered on cheap t-shirts with slogans he never would have uttered. His stoic ethos was twisted into marketable soundbites. The final, most painful insult came from the current champion, Damien Vanguard. Vanguard was the antithesis of the Titan, all flash, no substance. He was a product of the modern era, a brand more than a man. And in a move of supreme arrogance, he had started using a modified version of the Titan's legendary finishing move, the Final Testament. Vanguard called his version the Upgrade, a slick, disrespectful nod that implied the past was something to be improved upon rather than honored. For the company, it was a clever marketing synergy. For Ilara, it was the desecration of a grave. Ilara had spent her entire adult life running from the shadow of that ring. For her, it wasn't a place of glory. It was the place that had taken her father from her, consuming his time, his health, and ultimately, his life. She had built a quiet existence for herself, far from the roar of the crowd, cherishing the memory of the man, not the myth. She wanted nothing to do with his legacy, only with the father who taught her how to fish and read her bedtime stories. She never watched the shows, never read the articles, but the noise of the marketing machine eventually became too loud to ignore. A friend sent her a clip of Vanguard smirking as he hit the upgrade and mocked the man her father was. She saw the t-shirts, heard the commentary, and felt a piece of her father's soul being carved up and sold for parts. Her journey to that ring wasn't a plan hatched over months. It was a primal, immediate response. A deep, dormant instinct to protect her family's honor. She didn't want fame. She didn't want a contract. She didn't want revenge. She just wanted them to remember. She wanted the champion who stood on her father's shoulders to look into the eyes of the daughter he left behind and see that a legacy is not a brand. It is a living, breathing thing, carried in the hearts of those who loved him. Her walk down that ramp was not an act of protest against a company. It was an act of love for her father. Her silence was her shield, and her presence was her statement. The fallout inside WWE was a quiet, strategic earthquake. The executives were caught in a trap of their own making. Punishing Ilara was impossible. In the court of public opinion, she was a hero, a guardian of a sacred legacy. Fining or banning her would ignite a firestorm of bad press they couldn't possibly contain. So, they tried the only other thing they knew how to do. They tried to monetize the moment. They reached out to her through back channels, offering her everything. A lucrative contract, a role as an on-screen authority figure, a primetime slot on the next pay-per-view to finally get on a microphone and tell her story. They saw her silent protest, not as a message to be heard, but as a hot new angle to be exploited. She refused it all. She agreed to a single, private meeting with the highest levels of management. No cameras, no agents, no fanfare. No one knows for certain what was said in that room. But the people who were there described her as possessing the same unnerving calm she had in the ring. She didn't shout, she didn't make demands. She simply spoke her truth, telling them what her father's name meant and what they had allowed it to become. And then, as quietly as she had arrived, she was gone. She vanished from the public eye, declining every interview request and disappearing back into the normal life she had fought so hard to build. Her goal was never to join their world. It was simply to remind it of its soul. The most profound change, however, happened not in the boardroom, but in the heart of one man. Damien Vanguard was never the same after that night. The incident had shattered his carefully constructed aura of invincibility. The fans no longer saw him as a confident champion. They saw him as the arrogant kid who had disrespected a legend and been put in his place by a ghost. His swagger felt hollow, his promos rang false. The championship on his shoulder suddenly felt heavier. A few weeks later, at a small, untelevised live event in a quiet town, something remarkable happened. During his main event match, Vanguard set his opponent up for his finishing move, the upgrade. The crowd groaned, anticipating the familiar act of disrespect, but then he hesitated. He looked down at his opponent, then at his own hands, and simply let him go. He finished the match with a different move. He never used the Titan's finisher again. That was Ilara's true victory. It wasn't in the headlines or the trending topics. It was in that small, unseen moment of quiet reflection. She had walked into a world of scripted drama, and without uttering a single word, had created the most real story of all. She proved that the most powerful statements aren't always the ones that are shouted into a microphone. Sometimes they are delivered in the profound, deafening power of silence. The story wasn't about a woman who interrupted a wrestling show. It was about a daughter who reclaimed her father's spirit, reminding a champion and the world that a legacy isn't just about what you leave behind, it's about what you protect.